We're looking at number 17. And it's these two tablets right here we need to look at. And we really should have started with these tablets, because these are the ones that caused all the problem. Remember I talked about the Gilgamesh epic?
Yeah.
Back in the 1800s when they discovered these tablets. The top one is about the flood account. The one below it is about the epic of creation. The same flood account, the same story of creation that we find in the Bible. But these were written in the 6th century BC. Men like Wellhausen said, these must be the sources for those stories, which means that the Bible was written after the 6th century BC, possibly in the 5th century BC, redacted back to Moses in 1400 BC. Now here's the problem. David, where are you? Right here. This is written, that's a flood account, written in the 6th century BC. When was your tablet written?
1635.
Give him a hand. 1635. Good man. He remembered it. 1635 BC. How many years is that before the 6th century BC?
1000.
How about 1100 years earlier? The exact same story. The same story has just now been discovered. That's a new tablet that was just discovered in the last 20 years. The same story written in 1635 that you find here on the Gilgamesh epic, proving that this story has been around for a lot longer than 6th century BC. It now puts it back over 1,000 years. When was when was Moses living? Who wrote the story of the flood account? 1400 BC, which comes after the Atrahasis tablet you saw over there. That tablet that we looked over there is 200 years older than Moses. Proving that this story was well known by the time Moses wrote it down. He did source it, and here's what's interesting. When you look at the flood account, this is not the only flood account, nor is the Atrahasis tablet the only flood account. They have now found 200 flood accounts in 200 different cultures. Almost every culture has a flood account. Proving that it all goes back to a much earlier flood account. If it's every culture, almost every culture in the world has a flood account, it looks like there was a flood. Isn't that interesting? But when you look at it, you will see they're very simplistic stories. They don't take you anywhere. A man and his family are in a boat with all the animals. They're saved from the flood and they go populate the world. That's all it says. When you look at the biblical account, it's much more intrinsic, especially when you come to the epic of creation. When you look at the biblical account, you will see the epic of creation is much more sophisticated. You can see that there was a perfect environment there in the Garden of Eden. There was no thorns, no thistles, no childbirth pain. Man and woman were naked. They knew nothing was wrong with their nakedness. They were able to name the animals. There's a perfect relation with the animal kingdom, with their environment. And most importantly, in Genesis chapter 3, verse 8 and 9, man and God were walking and talking in the cool of the day. There was a perfect relation between man and God. He was in God's presence until they ate of the fruit. Once they ate of the fruit, everything was destroyed. From that time, now there were thorns and thistles. Now there were childbirth pain. Now man had to work the ground to get his own food. Now women and man knew that they were naked. They had to cover themselves up and they knew something was wrong there. And most importantly, they were thrown out of God's presence. They could no longer walk and talk with God. And from that time on, none of us can walk and talk with God because of that one event. That is foundational to the rest of Scripture. You cannot read any book, you cannot read any chapter that comes after without going back to that account, without going back to that story, showing how foundational that story is in the Bible. Historians are starting to realize that the Bible is unique. Not only is that story so intrinsic for the rest of the Bible, showing that it is foundational, they're finding something else about the Bible. Now, David, you're going to be my Muslim right now. Your name is going to be Abdul, okay? You're my Muslim friend, Abdul.
Very good, my friend.
Very good, my friend. Now, let me tell you, Abdul, who is your prophet?
Muhammad. God bless.
What do you know
Peace be
about
upon his name. You're not a lot, my friend.
You know quite a bit about him. What do you know about him?
He murdered and...
He's pretty good, huh?
Yeah. Oh, my friend, I do a lot of Paki, my friend.
He murdered him. Don't say this. You know, he was the perfect man, the perfect husband, the perfect ruler. In everything, he was the superlative, yes?
Amen.
And where do you get your story from?
Quran.
No, not from the Quran. There's not much about Muhammad in the Quran. Where do you get the story for all these things that he did with his wives and what he did with the Jews and Medina and all this? Where do all these stories come from? From his biography. And who wrote his biography? Ibn Hisham is his name. Yeah, I knew you were about ready to say it. Ibn Hisham was...
I was close.
There you go. You're on the tip of your tongue. And Ibn Hisham died when?
732.
How about 833? Oh. You almost had it. 833.
200 years after Muhammad.
200 years after Muhammad was the first biography of your prophet written down. 200 years it takes for you guys to write your biography down. Now, you don't like my Bible, do you? You don't like my Old Testament.
Oh, no.
And what do you don't like about my Old Testament?
It's
It's true.
It's got all kinds of characters that were nasty, who were God's chosen people, right? You have David. Look what David did with Uriah. Look what David did with Bathsheba. Look at Moses. In fact, every character in the Bible, all these great men of God were evil men, weren't they? And you don't like that because God's prophets are not evil, right? You know your prophet is not evil. You know that God's prophets are all sinless, right? You say that to me all the time, Abdul. God's prophets are sinless. They are above everybody else until you get to the Bible. The Bible is full of prophets who are sinful. Yeah? That's why you don't like my Bible. And you said, therefore, my Bible is incorrect. And you tell me that I have to shake your hand.
Left hand, please.
Left hand, that's the one I use for potty. I want to shake your right hand. You know that better than use my left hand. Now, Abdul, here's the problem. And historians are now looking at this. Because when you look at the Prophet Muhammad, your prophet, everything about your prophet is bad. He's the best this, he's the best husband, he's the best king, he's the best conqueror. In every category, he's the best. That's why you love him so much.
Oh, very much so.
But see, everything you know about your prophet was written 200 years after the fact. Therefore, it's based on what? Oral tradition. All based on oral tradition. Nothing. He's good, isn't he?
He is, yeah.
Yeah, he's very good. Better than you. Now, what's the problem with oral tradition, Abdul?
Changes.
How do you know?
Well, no one can keep. Everyone changes
Give
their
you an
own.
example. If I told something in your ear, you tell him, you tell him, you tell him. By the time it gets to this character over here, what I told you and what he tells me will be two different things. Have you ever played that game? Chinese whispers. It's a great game to play in parties. And that can happen within 15 minutes. What I tell him and what he tells me, within 15 minutes it can get changed. Can you imagine what happens over 200 years? Especially if what I'm telling you is something that's important to your character and your identity, as Muhammad is. What happens? It gets embellished, does it not? And anything that's bad about him gets thrown out.
And you exaggerate a bit.
It gets exaggerated a bit. Knowing you, Abdul, you exaggerate everything.
Oh, very much so, my brother.
But here's what historians are looking at. Historians know this. Historians know that every piece of archaic literature is full of exaggeration. Have you noticed that all the artifacts we've looked at downstairs, they don't say anything about any defeats? Have you noticed that? They don't ever mention defeats. They only show what went right. That's called political spin. And that's why historians are always assume that every artifact would do that, including your biography of your prophet. It's only when they come to the Bible. The Bible uniquely keeps the sins of the prophets in it, proving it's the most accurate of all historical data. It's the most accurate account. And the very thing you don't like about my Bible, I shake your hand because you're just proving the authority. You're proving the authority of my Bible, and you're proving the authenticity of my Bible historically. The fact that the sins are left in shows how authoritative our Bible is, shows how authentic it is, proving that it is unique amongst all archaic pieces of literature.
Prove that all man sinned as well.
That's right, but not our Bible. Our Bible keeps the sins in. Even the New Testament. Take a look what the New Testament says about the disciples when Jesus was arrested. They all ran away from him. Don't you think the disciples would want that taken out? Or what about Peter? Denies Christ 3 times. Don't you think he'd want that story taken out?
Thomas
Or
Doubting.
what about Paul? All the nasty things that Luke says about Paul. He didn't get along with anybody. The fact that they're left in shows how authentic they are. That's why when the historians are now looking at the Bible, they're starting to realize that the Bible stands alone amongst all archaic pieces of literature. It keeps the sins in. It doesn't embellish the story. It doesn't sanitize the story. Every one of our prophets sins. Why? Because God uses failed men.
Use the foolish things as well to shame the wise.
There you go. You're supposed to be a Muslim. Where did you get that from?
Oh, it's very good, my friend. A very good Christian customer come to me get kebab.
He's already converted, this man.
Yeah, very good, my friend.
I love going back to the Bible, and that's why they're now looking at these stories and realizing that these are nothing more than basically renditions from earlier revelation. And it looks like the Bible may be the source for all these stories. These are simplistic, which happens over telling. When you do for oral tradition, it gets more simplistic. These are nothing more than embellished stories. The Bible is the only one that keeps everything in and is foundational to everything else. Good stuff, isn't it? Now let's put that to a test and let's look at the book of Daniel. To do that, let's just come over here. Now the book of Daniel gets pretty exciting. The book of Daniel, historians don't like. Why don't they like the book of Daniel? What is it about the book of Daniel that bothers them? We're now on page 18. The book of Daniel talks about prophecy. What's more than that, it prophesies 4 different kingdoms. Now, historians don't like that, because how could someone prophesy in the future and get it correct? When you look at the 4 kingdoms that it talks about in the book of Daniel, it mentions the kingdoms of the Babylonians. Well, that's not prophetic, because Daniel was there in Babylon in 539 when Babylon was destroyed. It also mentions the Persians. Well, that's not prophetic as well, because it was Cyrus the Great, who is a Persian, who destroys Babylon in 539. Actually, it was Darius the Mede, under the authority of Cyrus the Great, who destroys Babylon. So that's not prophetic at all, because certainly the Babylonians and the Persians were living at the time of Daniel. See, Daniel was living in 539, the 6th century BC. It's the next 2 kingdoms that are problematic, because Daniel mentions about the Greeks. The Greeks, in fact, Alexander the Great, who has 3 big generals, mentions them. But they don't appear until the 3rd century. Daniel is living in the 6th century. And then it talks about the Romans, who don't appear till the 2nd century. Daniel is living in the 6th century. So how could someone writing in the 6th century know about people that were yet to exist 300 to 400 years later? No wonder the historians don't like it. So therefore, they looked at the book of Daniel to try to find if there's any error in the book of Daniel, historically, and they found it. And the error they found is with a king called Belshazzar. Belshazzar is the king that Daniel comes to. In fact, remember in the book of Daniel, it mentions that Belshazzar has writing on the wall. He asks Daniel to interpret the writing. He does so. And then he says in Daniel chapter 5, verse 60, because of this, you'll be number 3 in the kingdom. Right? Why number 3 if he's number 1? Should be number 2. That's a curiosity. We'll come back to that. But then he mentions Belshazzar is the reference of the king. Now take a look at all these artifacts. If you look at all these artifacts, there's no reference anywhere to Belshazzar. The last king of the Babylonians that was destroyed in 539 is Nabonidus. Why does the Bible not talk about Nabonidus? And why does it mention Belshazzar? It looks like the Bible's got it wrong. And the historians love this, because that's proof now that the book of Daniel could not have been written in the 6th century. It was possibly written in the 2nd century. That's why they would have known about the Romans and the Greeks, who don't appear to the 3rd and the 2nd century. Redacting it back to the 6th century, didn't know who the king was, so they just made up the name Belshazzar. They've got the wrong king. There is no Belshazzar. There's no reference anywhere to anybody called Belshazzar. Whoever wrote the book of Daniel should have said Nabonidus. Doesn't do so. Looks like the Bible's in error. Looks like they got us over a barrel, right?
Is it the same man?
Nope. You want an answer? I don't have it. Let's go.